The moment she moved, the entire world realized it was already too late. The first sound wasn't the shout, it was the shift in the air, subtle, wrong, like a storm about to break inside a quiet room. And Emily Carter felt it before she understood it, standing there with a cheap tray in her hands, her feet aching from a 12-hour shift, her rent overdue by 2 weeks, her phone buzzing with another message she couldn't afford to read. She should have left 10 minutes ago, should have clocked out and walked the 6 blocks back to her tiny apartment. But something kept her there, something she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the man in the corner, the one no one else dared to look at, dressed in black like he didn't belong to the same world, sitting perfectly still while everyone else laughed too loud and drank too much. He hadn't touched his glass, hadn't moved an inch, but somehow the space around him felt colder, heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. Emily noticed things like that. She always had, small details, quiet warnings the way. Her instincts whispered before trouble arrived, and right now they were screaming, "Don't stay, don't look, don't get involved." But she needed the tip, needed every dollar she could get. So she stepped closer anyway, forcing a polite smile. "Can I get you anything?" Her voice steady even as her hands trembled. The man lifted his eyes, and for a split second, everything else disappeared. Conversations faded, music blurred, time slowed. His gaze wasn't just cold, it was ancient, like he had seen things no one should ever see, like he was measuring her without saying a word. Emily swallowed hard, fighting the urge to step back, but she didn't. She held her ground, because that's what survival looked like, pretending you weren't afraid even when you were. And something in that moment changed, something small but irreversible, because he noticed that she didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't treat him like something to avoid. And that was the exact second everything began to fall apart. The door opened behind her with a sound too sharp, too sudden. Emily turned slightly, just enough to catch it, the wrong kind of movement. A coat shifting where it shouldn't, a hand held too stiff, too deliberate. Her heart slammed against her ribs, instincts taking over before logic could catch up. Don't think, just act. She dropped the tray, plates crashing against the floor as heads turned too late. "Get down," she shouted, the words tearing out of her throat as she lunged forward, closing the distance between her and the man in black in less than a second. Her body moving on pure instinct, driven by something deeper than fear, deeper than reason. And then the world fractured into sound and silence all at once. She felt the impact, not pain, not yet, just force, like the air had turned solid around her, like gravity had doubled without warning. And suddenly she was falling, but she never hit the ground, because arms caught her, strong, unyielding, impossibly fast. And for the first time since he walked into that room, Lucian Voss moved, truly moved, his hands steady as they held her, but his eyes, those impossible eyes, burned with something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to shock. The noise around them faded into nothing, the room frozen in place, every heartbeat suspended in that single moment. And as Emily struggled to breathe, her vision dimming at the edges, she forced her eyes open just enough to see him clearly, the man no one dared approach, the man who now looked at her like she had just done the one thing no one ever had. She tried to smile, barely managing a whisper. "I just didn't want you to die." And something in his expression shattered completely for a moment. The world did not move. It did not breathe. It did not exist beyond the space between them. Lucian Voss stared down at the girl in his arms, as if reality itself had fractured, her words echoing in his mind in a way that made no sense. No human spoke to him like that. No human chose him. Not like this. Not without fear. Not without reason. And yet here she was, fragile, trembling, fading, and still thinking about him instead of herself. His grip tightened instinctively, not enough to hurt, but enough to anchor her there. As if letting go would undo something irreversible, his senses sharpened all at once, every detail flooding in with unbearable clarity. The slowing rhythm of her heartbeat, the warmth of her skin against the unnatural cold of his hands, the scent of her blood, different, not just human, something beneath it, something ancient, something that should not exist. His eyes darkened as realization flickered and vanished just as quickly. Impossible. He had lived for centuries, had seen every variation of humanity, every lie, every miracle that turned out to be nothing more than coincidence. But this felt deliberate, like a thread pulled tight across time. "Stay with me," he said, his voice lower than before, quieter, but carrying a weight that silenced the entire room. It was not a command, not entirely, but something closer to a plea, something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Emily's breath hitched, shallow, uneven, her fingers weakly curling against his sleeve as if trying to hold onto something solid, something real. She did not understand what was happening, did not understand why the air felt heavier, why the room had gone so still, why no one dared to move or speak. But she felt him, the steadiness in his voice, the strange calm in the way he held her, and somehow, that was enough to keep her from slipping away completely. "I am fine," she whispered, even though she was not, even though everything in her body felt distant and slow, even though her vision blurred at the edges. But that was who she was, always. Minimizing, always enduring, always pretending she could handle more than she should. Lucian's expression shifted, something sharp cutting through the controlled mask he had worn for centuries. Fine was a lie. He knew it the moment she said it. He could hear it in the fragile cadence of her voice, could feel it in the weakening pulse beneath his touch, and yet she said it anyway, as if her own condition mattered less than the fact that he was still standing, still alive, still untouched. And that realization struck deeper than anything else, deeper than the danger that had just passed, deeper than the silent tension still lingering in the air, because for the first time in centuries, someone had chosen him without knowing who or what he was, chosen him without expecting anything in return, and that was something the world had never given him before. His jaw tightened as he made a decision, swift, absolute, leaving no room for doubt. "You are not fine," he said softly, almost to himself, as his gaze lifted, scanning the room with a presence that shifted the atmosphere instantly. The stillness broke, not loudly, not violently, but with a quiet understanding that something had changed, something irreversible. No one stepped forward, no one questioned, because they could feel it too, the shift in him, the line that had just been crossed. Lucian looked back down at Emily, his hand moving slightly to support her more securely, careful, precise, as if she were something far more valuable than anything else in that room. "You are coming with me," he said, and this time, it was not a suggestion, not a request. It was a statement that rewrote the course of her life in a single breath. Emily tried to respond, tried to argue, to say she needed to go home, that she had responsibilities, that she could not just disappear, but the words never fully formed, her strength fading too quickly, her body giving in to something she could no longer control, her head resting lightly against him as her eyes closed despite her effort to keep them open. And as she slipped into unconsciousness, her last thought was not fear, not regret, but confusion, because somehow, in the middle of everything, she felt safe. And that was the one thing that made no sense at all. Lucian stilled for a fraction of a second, feeling the exact moment her body relaxed completely, his expression hardening in a way that promised something far greater than anger, something colder, more precise, more inevitable. But beneath it, buried deep where no one could see, something else had taken root, something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to protectiveness, and he knew, without a doubt, that nothing in his world would remain the same after this night. She should have woken up in pain, but instead she woke up to silence, deep, unnatural silence that pressed against her ears like the world had been stripped of sound. Emily Carter's eyes fluttered open slowly, her body heavy, unfamiliar, as if it no longer fully belonged to her. The first thing she noticed was the ceiling, not the cracked plaster of her apartment, not the dim flicker of a broken light, but something vast and distant, smooth stone stretching high above her, lined with shadows that seemed to move when she tried to focus. She inhaled sharply, the air colder than she expected, cleaner, sharper, carrying a faint metallic scent she could not place. And then memory rushed back all at once, the tray falling, the warning she shouted, the man in black, his eyes, his voice. The moment everything changed, she pushed herself up too quickly, her breath catching as the world tilted. But before she could fall, a hand steadied her, firm, controlled, unmistakable. "You should not move yet," the voice said, calm, measured, but carrying the same weight she remembered. Emily turned her head, and there he was, standing beside the bed as if he had never left, Lucian Voss, unchanged, composed, watching her with an intensity that made her chest tighten for reasons she could not explain. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice rough, unfamiliar even to herself. Lucian did not answer immediately, his gaze shifting briefly as if considering how much to reveal, or perhaps whether she was ready to hear it at all. "Somewhere safe," he said finally, and the words should have comforted her, but they did not entirely, because nothing about this place felt normal. Nothing about him felt normal. Emily looked down at herself, expecting to see something worse, something she was not ready to face, but instead she found clean bandages, carefully placed, precise, deliberate. Her breathing steadied slightly, confusion replacing fear for just a moment. "I should not be here," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "I need to go home." The words felt automatic, rehearsed from years of responsibility and survival. Lucian's expression did not change, but something in the air shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. "You cannot leave," he said, and there was no force in his tone, no raised voice, but the certainty in it was absolute. Emily looked up at him sharply, a flicker of defiance breaking through her exhaustion. "You do not get to decide that," she said, her voice weak but steady. And for a moment, just a moment, something like surprise crossed his face, as if he had expected fear, compliance, silence. But not this, not resistance, not from someone in her condition. "You misunderstand," Lucian replied quietly, stepping closer, his presence filling the space without effort. "This is not about choice." Emily's pulse quickened, despite herself, not from fear alone, but from the realization that whatever world she had stepped into, it did not follow the same rules she was used to. She held his gaze anyway, refusing to look away, refusing to shrink. "Even now, even here." "Then explain it to me," she said, and the room seemed to still around them once more. Lucian studied her for a long moment, longer than necessary, as if searching for something he could not name, something that should not exist, and yet did, right in front of him. "You should not have survived," he said at last, not cruelly, not coldly, but as a simple statement of fact. And the words sent a quiet chill through her, not because of what they meant, but because of how certain he sounded. Emily swallowed, her mind racing, trying to make sense of something that refused to fit into any explanation she understood. "But I did," she replied, and something in her voice shifted, something stronger, something that surprised even her. Lucian's eyes darkened slightly, not with anger, not with suspicion, but with something far more complicated. "Yes," he said softly, "you did." And in that moment, both of them understood, without fully saying it, that whatever had happened that night was not an accident, and whatever came next would not be simple, because somewhere between her choice and his existence, something impossible had just begun. The silence between them did not feel empty. It felt heavy, like something unseen had settled into the room and refused to leave. Emily Carter held his gaze longer than she should have, longer than any reasonable person would, but something inside her refused to back down, even now, even here, because if she let fear take over, she would lose the only thing she had ever truly owned, herself. "Then tell me what I am doing here," she said, her voice steadier this time, even as her body reminded her she was not fully recovered. Lucian Voss did not answer right away, not because he did not have an answer, but because the truth was not simple, not something that could be handed to her without consequence. His eyes moved briefly to her hand, where the bandages covered more than just an injury, and for a fraction of a second, something beneath them pulsed faintly, a glow too subtle for a human to notice, but not for him, never for him. "You are here," he began slowly, choosing each word with deliberate precision, "because something happened that should not have happened." Emily frowned slightly, frustration mixing with confusion. "That is not an explanation," she replied, and there it was again, that quiet defiance, that refusal to accept half-truths. Lucian stepped closer, close enough now that she could feel the drop in temperature, close enough that the space between them seemed to tighten. "You stood between danger and a stranger," he said, his voice lower now, softer, but carrying something far more dangerous beneath it. And you survived. Emily's breath caught, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like survival itself was the anomaly. Like she had broken something invisible simply by still being alive. People survive things every day, she said, though the words felt weaker the moment they left her lips, because deep down, she knew this was different. Everything about this was different. Lucian's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. Not like this, he replied, and the certainty in his voice left no room for argument. Emily looked away for the first time, her thoughts racing, trying to find something familiar to hold on to, something normal, but nothing fit. Not the room, not him, not even her own body, which felt stronger in some ways, lighter, as if something inside her had shifted without her permission. "What are you not telling me?" she asked quietly. And this time, there was no challenge in her tone, only a need for clarity. Lucian studied her again, longer than before, as if weighing something unseen, something older than either of them. And then, slowly, he reached out, not to grab her, not to restrain her, but to take her hand gently, carefully, as if testing a theory he was not ready to confirm. The moment his fingers brushed against her skin, the air changed, not violently, not dramatically, but enough that both of them felt it, a subtle pull, like two opposing forces suddenly aligning. Emily's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching as something unfamiliar flickered through her chest. Not pain, not fear, something else, something deeper, something that felt like recognition without memory. Lucian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, because he felt it too, stronger, clearer, undeniable. "That," he said quietly, his voice no longer entirely steady, "is what I am not telling you." Emily looked down at their hands, then back up at him, her confusion now mixed with something else, something she could not name. "What is it?" she whispered, and for the first time since she met him, Lucian hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because saying it aloud would make it real in a way he could not undo. "It is a bond," he said finally, the word hanging in the air between them like something alive, one that should not exist. And the moment those words settled, Emily felt it, not fully, not completely, but enough to know that whatever had tied her to this man, to this place, was not something she could simply walk away from, no matter how much she wanted to. The word lingered in the air long after he said it. A bond. It did not sound real. It did not sound possible. And yet Emily Carter could feel it, not as a thought, not as an idea, but as something physical, something quiet and constant beneath her skin, like a second heartbeat she had never noticed before. She slowly pulled her hand back, not out of fear, but because she needed distance, needed space to think, to breathe, to understand. "That is not possible," she said, shaking her head slightly, her voice calm but firm, the way people spoke when they were trying to hold on to logic in a situation that refused to make sense. Lucian Voss did not argue, did not interrupt. He simply watched her, the way he had been watching her since the moment she stepped into his world, as if every reaction, every word she chose, mattered more than she realized. "It should not be," he agreed quietly, and that was what made it worse. Not denial, not dismissal, but confirmation. Emily let out a slow breath, her mind racing through everything she knew, everything she believed, none of it fitting into this moment, none of it explaining why she was here, why she felt different, why this man spoke about impossible things as if they were facts. "Then undo it," she said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. But she did not take them back. She could not, because this was not her life, not her world, and she refused to accept it without a fight. Lucian's gaze shifted slightly, something unreadable passing through his expression, not anger, not offense, something closer to restraint. "If it could be undone," he said slowly, "you would not be here." The finality in his voice settled heavily between them, and for the first time, Emily felt something close to real fear, not of him, not entirely, but of the situation itself, of the realization that she might not have control over what came next. She stood carefully, ignoring the way her body protested, ignoring the faint dizziness that threatened to pull her back down, because staying still felt worse. Staying still felt like giving in. "You keep saying things like that," she said, her voice quieter now, more controlled. "But you are not actually explaining anything." Lucian watched her as she moved, noting the strength she forced into her posture, the way she refused to show weakness even when it was obvious. And something about that only reinforced what he already knew. She was not ordinary, no matter how much she believed she was. There are rules, he said, his tone measured, each word placed with intention. Ancient ones. Emily let out a small, humorless breath. Of course there are, she muttered, running a hand through her hair as she paced a few steps. The room too large, too unfamiliar, and I broke them. Lucian did not respond immediately, but the silence itself was an answer. Emily stopped walking, turning back to face him, her eyes searching his for something she could trust, something solid. I did not even know they existed, she said. And there it was, the truth beneath everything else. Not anger, not defiance, but frustration, the kind that came from being pulled into something without consent, without understanding. Lucian's expression softened, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. That is why this is a problem, he said, and for the first time, his voice carried something beyond control, something heavier, something that suggested this was not just her burden to carry. Emily crossed her arms instinctively, grounding herself, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy in a place that offered none. Then start talking, she said, meeting his gaze again. Because if I am stuck here, I deserve to know why. Lucian held her stare, and for a long moment, neither of them moved, neither of them looked away, until finally, something in him shifted, a decision made, silent but absolute. Very well, he said, his voice low, steady. But once you understand, there will be no going back. And something in the way he said it made Emily's chest tighten, not because she doubted him, but because deep down, she already knew he was right. Lucian Voss did not speak immediately, and that silence carried more weight than any answer he could have given, because it was the kind of silence that came before something irreversible, the kind that changed the direction of everything that followed. Emily Carter felt it before he even began, the shift in the air, the quiet tension that settled between them like a warning. And for the first time since she woke up, she hesitated, not because she was afraid of him, but because she sensed that whatever he was about to say would erase the last piece of normal she still held on to. There are laws that govern my world, Lucian said at last, his voice calm, measured, but threaded with something older, something that did not belong to time as she understood it. They are not written, not spoken openly, but they are absolute. Emily crossed her arms tighter, grounding herself, her eyes never leaving his. And I broke one, she said, more statement than question now. Lucian's gaze sharpened slightly. You did more than break it, he replied, taking a slow step closer, his presence filling the space in a way that made everything else feel distant, irrelevant. You triggered something that has not happened in over 300 years. The number alone made her breath catch, not because she believed it fully, but because of how easily he said it, as if centuries meant nothing, as if time itself bent around him. That is not possible, she said again. But this time, there was less certainty in her voice. Lucian did not argue. He simply continued. A bond like this is not created by chance, he said, his tone steady, deliberate. It requires alignment, conditions that almost never occur, and even when they do, it fails more often than it succeeds. Emily frowned, trying to follow, trying to make sense of something that refused to fit into logic. Then why did it happen? She asked, her voice quieter now, not challenging, but searching. Lucian's eyes held hers, unflinching. Because you chose me, he said, and the simplicity of the answer hit harder than anything else. Emily blinked, caught off guard. I chose to help someone, she corrected quickly, shaking her head. That is all. Lucian's expression did not change, but something in his gaze deepened. No, he said softly, you chose me, without knowing who I am, without hesitation, without fear, and that matters. Emily opened her mouth to respond, to argue, but the words did not come as easily this time, because a part of her knew he was not wrong. She had not thought, had not calculated, she had just acted, and now she was paying the price for it. That still does not explain this, she said finally, gesturing slightly, to the room, to herself, to him, to everything that felt wrong and unfamiliar. Lucian nodded once, as if he expected that. The bond connects more than circumstance, he explained, his voice lowering. It ties existence, instinct, awareness. Emily's pulse quickened, a faint echo of something she had felt before, that quiet pull beneath her skin, that second rhythm she could not ignore anymore. That is why you feel different, he continued, watching her closely now. Why your body is responding in ways it should not. Why you can stand here after what happened. Emily's breath hitched slightly, her mind flashing back to the moment she woke up, the strange clarity, the absence of pain she expected, the strength that did not belong to her. You are saying I am not normal, she said slowly. The word feeling inadequate. Lucian's gaze softened just enough to make the answer land differently. You are still human, he said, but not untouched. The words settled deep, heavier than she expected, and for a moment, Emily did not speak, did not move, because she could feel it now, truly feel it. Not just the difference, but the connection, the quiet awareness of him standing there, like a presence she could sense even without looking. And that was what unsettled her the most, not the danger, not the unknown, but the fact that part of her did not want to pull away from it. Lucian watched the realization take hold, watched the shift in her expression as understanding replaced denial, and for the first time, there was no distance left between truth and consequence. This bond cannot be ignored, he said quietly, and it cannot be broken. Emily finally looked up at him again, her eyes clearer now, sharper, no longer just confused, but aware. Then what happens next? She asked, and the question lingered between them, heavier than anything that had come before, because whatever the answer was, it would define everything that came after. The question did not echo. It settled, heavy and final, as if the room itself was waiting for the answer. Lucian Voss did not look away, but something in his expression shifted, not hesitation, not uncertainty, something closer to calculation, as if he were weighing outcomes that stretched far beyond this moment. What happens next? He repeated quietly, and for a brief second, his voice carried something deeper, something edged with consequence. Emily Carter held her ground, even as the quiet pull beneath her skin grew stronger, more noticeable now that she understood it was real, not imagined. It was like standing near a current she could not see but could feel, constant, undeniable, tied to him in a way that made distance meaningless. You return to your life, Lucian said at last, and the answer came too quickly, too cleanly, like it had been prepared in advance. Emily frowned slightly, her instincts pushing back immediately. That sounds simple, she replied, her tone careful, measured. But nothing about this is simple. Lucian's gaze sharpened, not in disagreement, but in acknowledgement. No, he said, it is not. A brief silence followed, and this time it felt different, not empty, but restrained, like something unspoken was being held back deliberately. Emily stepped closer without realizing it, drawn not by trust, but by the need for clarity. Then stopped speaking around it, she said, her voice quieter now, but firmer. If I go back, what happens to this? She gestured between them, not dramatically, not even visibly, but both of them understood exactly what she meant. Lucian's eyes followed the movement, then returned to hers, and for the first time since this began, there was no distance in his expression, no mask, only truth. It does not disappear, he said, and the certainty in his voice left no room for hope of an easy answer. Emily's chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of that reality settling in. Then I will feel it, she said slowly, even if I leave. Lucian inclined his head once. Yes. Emily exhaled, the air leaving her lungs slower. This time, heavier, because she could already imagine it, going back to her small apartment, back to late shifts and unpaid bills, back to a life that now felt smaller than it had just hours ago, and carrying this with her, this constant awareness of something she could not explain, could not control. And you? She asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. You will feel it too. Lucian did not answer immediately, but the silence was enough. Emily studied him, searching for something in his reaction, something that told her how much this mattered to him. But he gave nothing away, not fully. That is a problem, she said quietly, more to herself than to him. Lucian's gaze darkened just slightly. It is more than a problem, he replied, his voice lower now, edged with something she could not quite define. It is a risk. Emily looked at him sharply. To who? She asked, and the moment the question left her lips, she realized she was not sure she wanted the answer. Lucian took a step closer, the space between them narrowing until the tension became something almost tangible. To you, he said simply, and this time, there was no softness in his tone, no attempt to make it easier to accept, just truth, clear and unfiltered. Emily's pulse quickened, not from panic, but from the realization that this was bigger than she thought, bigger than just her, bigger than just him. Because of you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucian did not deny it. Because of what I am, he corrected, and the difference between those two statements settled heavily between them. Emily held his gaze, her thoughts moving faster now, piecing together what he was not saying, what he could not say. Outright. Then they will come, she said slowly, the words forming as understanding took shape. Lucian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes confirmed it before he spoke. They already know, he said, and in that moment, the quiet of the room shifted again, no longer calm, no longer still, but waiting, like something inevitable was already on its way, and for the first time since she woke up, Emily felt it clearly, not just the bond, not just the connection, but the consequence of it. Closing in around them, both the words did not leave her mind. They stayed, echoing in a way that made the room feel smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were listening. They already know, Emily Carter repeated quietly, and this time, the fear was not sharp or sudden. It was slow, creeping, settling into her chest with a weight she could not ignore. She looked around the room instinctively, as if expecting someone to be standing just beyond the shadows, watching, waiting, but there was nothing, only silence, only the distant stillness that made everything feel too controlled to be safe. Who? She asked, her voice steady despite the tension building inside her. Lucian Voss did not move, but his presence shifted, subtle, controlled, like something had locked into place. Those who enforce the laws, he said, his tone calm, but the meaning behind it was anything but. Emily frowned, her mind racing to catch up. And they will come here, she said, more statement than question. Lucian's gaze held hers, unwavering. They will come for you, he corrected, and that was when it truly settled. Not just the danger, not just the consequence, but the reality that this was no longer about understanding. It was about survival. Emily's pulse quickened, but she did not step back, did not retreat. Instead, she straightened slightly, forcing herself to stand firmer, to think clearer, because panic would not help her now. Then I should leave, she said, the logic immediate, almost instinctive. If I am not here, they will not find me. Lucian's expression changed for the first time, not dramatically, but enough that she knew she had said something wrong. You do not understand, he said quietly, stepping closer, the distance between them shrinking until it felt like there was no space left at all. This is not about location. Emily's breath caught slightly, her instincts reacting before her mind could process. Then what is it about? She asked, and this time, her voice was softer, not weaker, but more careful. Lucian's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with certainty. It is about connection, he said, and as if to prove it, the air shifted again, that same subtle pull rising between them, stronger now, undeniable. Emily felt it clearly this time, not just as a sensation, but as awareness, like a thread tying her to him no matter where she stood, no matter how far she moved. They do not need to see you to find you, he continued, his voice low, steady. They only need to feel this. Emily's chest tightened, her thoughts racing, trying to find a way out, a solution, something that made sense, but every path led back to the same place, back to him, back to this. Then what do we do? She asked, and this time, there was no resistance left in the question, only necessity. Lucian studied her for a long moment, as if measuring something beyond her. Words, beyond her fear, beyond her understanding. And then he spoke, each word deliberate, final. We do not run. Emily blinked, caught off guard. That is your plan, she said, disbelief threading through her voice. To stay here and wait. Lucian did not react to the tone, did not take offense. He simply held her gaze. To prepare, he corrected. and there was something in the way he said it that made the room feel colder, heavier, more real. Emily shook her head slightly, her thoughts refusing to settle. "You are not telling me everything," she said, and this time, it was not an accusation. It was certainty. Lucian's expression did not change, but the silence that followed confirmed it. Emily exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay grounded, to not let the unknown take over completely. "Then start now," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Because if they are already coming, I need to know what I am facing." Lucian looked at her, really looked at her, not as a stranger, not as an accident, but as something that had become part of his world whether he wanted it or not. And for the first time, there was no distance left in his gaze, no barrier, only truth waiting to be spoken, and whatever he said next would change everything she thought she knew about the world. And her place in it. Lucian Voss did not look away as the silence stretched between them, but this time it was different, no longer holding back, no longer measuring what should be said and what should remain hidden, because that moment had passed, because the truth was already too close to ignore. "What you are facing," he said slowly, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to settle into the very structure of the room, "is not a single threat." Emily Carter felt her breath slow, not from calm, but from focus, every word anchoring her deeper into a reality she could no longer deny. "Then what is it?" she asked, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear in her tone, only readiness. Lucian's gaze sharpened, not with danger, but with something far more deliberate. "It is a system," he said, "one that has existed long before you were born, long before the world you know took its current shape." Emily listened, her mind adjusting, shifting, forcing itself to follow something far beyond ordinary logic. "And I am part of it," she said quietly, not asking, but confirming. Lucian inclined his head once. "Yes." Emily exhaled slowly, the reality settling deeper, but instead of breaking under it, something inside her steadied, something that refused to collapse. "Then tell me the truth," she said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "What are you?" The question hung in the air, simple, direct, but carrying everything that had been left unsaid until now. Lucian did not answer immediately, not because he could not, but because once spoken, the distance between their worlds would vanish completely. But he had already crossed that line the moment he brought her here, the moment he chose not to let her go. "I am what your world pretends does not exist," he said at last, his voice low, controlled, but no longer restrained. "I am what governs the shadows behind it." Emily's pulse quickened, but she did not step back, did not look away, even as the meaning settled in fully. "A vampire," she said, the word quieter than she expected, but steady, real. Lucian's eyes held hers, unflinching. "Not just any," he replied, and there was no arrogance in his tone, only fact. "I am the one they answer to." The room seemed to still completely after that, as if the weight of those words demanded it. Emily absorbed it slowly, not rejecting it, not denying it, but accepting it piece by piece. Because everything she had seen, everything she had felt, pointed to the same truth, and denying it would change nothing. "And because of that," she said carefully, "they will come for me." Lucian did not soften the answer. "Yes." Emily nodded once, more to herself than to him, her thoughts aligning now, sharper, clearer, no longer scattered by confusion. "Then I do not go back," she said, and this time, it was not a question, not a suggestion, it was a decision. Lucian's expression shifted, not with surprise, but with recognition, as if he had expected this, as if he had been waiting for it. "No," he agreed quietly. "You do not." Emily took a slow breath, the weight of everything settling into something solid, something she could stand on, instead of something that pulled her under. "Then you stop protecting me like I am fragile," she said, her voice steady, stronger now. "And you tell me how to survive this." Lucian stepped closer, the space between them closing until the connection between them felt almost tangible, no longer hidden, no longer subtle, but present, undeniable. "You already started," he said, his voice softer now, but no less powerful, "the moment you chose to stand in front of me." Emily held his gaze, and for the first time since all of this began, there was no confusion left in her expression, only clarity, only resolve. Then I am not done, she said. And something in the air shifted again. Not tension, not fear, but something stronger, something that felt like the beginning of something neither of them could control anymore. Lucian studied her for a long moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded, not as a king, not as something ancient and untouchable, but as someone who had just acknowledged an equal force standing in front of him. And in that quiet moment, the truth settled fully between them, not spoken, but understood, that whatever came next would not be faced alone, and that even the coldest rulers could not remain unchanged when someone chose them without fear, because in a world built on power, the rarest force was not strength, but kindness. And it was the one thing capable of rewriting everything.